Joining us now, Florida Republican Senator Marco Rubio. Welcome to Fox News Sunday.
Thanks, Shannon.
So let's talk about this. Our polling also shows us that when everyone agrees the border is a problem, they want to assign blame. 81% say it's Congress's lack of action. You voted against the Senate deal. I know a lot of people had problems with it structurally and policy-wise, but what do you tell Americans about what the realistic path forward is on the border?
Well, the realistic path forward, if we want to end this crisis, begins by Joe Biden reversing the executive orders that he made. Every single one of them was designed to reverse a Trump policy. All those executive orders that are basically, for the first time in American history, we have a president who will not detain the people who entered this country illegally. Look, the immigration system in America is complicated, but our laws are pretty straightforward. It defines who's allowed to be in the country, and it says if you're here illegally, you should be detained through removal. And we used to have exceptions to that, but narrow exceptions, but the majority of people were detained. Now the reverse is happening. Now the exceptions have become the rule. Today, if you enter the United States illegally, you are going to be released. Your chances of being released into the country very quickly are between 85 and 90%. Okay? People know this. The word spreads. They come from all over the world now. There are 7.2 million people in this country that have entered over the last 3 years that are here illegally at this moment, entering through different methods and various ways that they've gotten here. That's an unsustainable thing, and all of that was driven by these changes. You can see it in the numbers beginning in January of 2021 when Joe Biden entered the White House. He needs to reverse and go back to the policies that were in place before then when we didn't have these numbers.
Okay, if he does that, would you support him? Because he's got a lot of pressure on the left saying do not go and do things that you blasted President Trump for doing. And it may also actually change what's happening at the border, depending on what he decides to do, giving him potentially at least an optical win in an election year. Would you support him in executive action?
Of course. Of course, and not only would we support it, we've called for it. He should have done that before. Look, remember, we spent 2.5 years arguing with the Biden administration over whether there was a crisis at all. We can't forget that for 2.5 years, Biden and all of his surrogates and deputies all said there is no crisis, there is no border crisis, there is nothing going on down there that's wrong. They spent a long time denying it until they couldn't deny it anymore. So, of course, I would support it. In fact, that's what I specifically have called for. Had he done so, I would have voted for the funding for Ukraine and all the other things, because I've supported Ukraine funding. But we have to prioritize this American crisis that we have in our hands, which I think is now posing a real danger. 6.2, 7.2 million people. Let's be conservative about that. Let's say it's 6.2 million that are in this country illegally right now that have been here over the last 3 years. If only 1% of them are dangerous criminals, that's 62,000 criminals in our streets today. People that were criminals overseas in their own countries before they even came here, and we're seeing that play out now every day tragically in the headlines on the news.
Well, and folks on the left, though, say you're using those numbers. The GOP is to scare people, to demonize. MSNBC says this: Trump's recent declaration that migrant crime, there you have that in quotes, constitutes a new category of crime is a clear signal for Republicans to lean even further into the anti-immigrant hysteria. And so they are. You are the son of Cuban immigrants who came to this country for a better life. What do you say to the left who says the GOP doesn't want that for other people now?
That's a ridiculous argument. There are criminals in every country in the world. Okay, you take 6.2 million people from anywhere. Some percentage of them are going to be criminals. Some of them were already criminals. They're not criminals because they're migrants. They're criminals because they're criminals. For example, there is a gang in Venezuela, in Tren de Aragua, well-known gang in Venezuela that left Venezuela, has terrorized Colombia, has terrorized Peru, has terrorized other countries. Some of those people have now made their way into the United States. What do we think they do once they get here? Do we think they become stockbrokers? Do we think they now become, they go and run some charity organization? No, they do here what they did in Peru, what they did in Colombia, what they did in Venezuela before that. They are criminals. Every single day they're playing out. Again, not because they're migrants, but because they are criminals. But this is what happens when you allow 7.2 million people to march into the country and invade it the way they have. Some percentage of them are going to be criminals. And guess what criminals do? They commit crimes. And that's what's happening in America now with many of these people.
I would expect that the president is going to address a lot of this and continue to point the finger at Republicans on the Hill for this at the State of the Union. But I want to make sure that we touch on Ukraine, because you mentioned that. You've said the reality at this point that we have to confront is that war ends with a negotiated settlement. What do you mean by that? Will Russia keep some of the territory it's taken? How much pressure do you think the U.S. or others in the international community should put on these two countries when it comes to finding a solution?
Well, I'm not going to set parameters on what that looks like. It's not our place to do that. It's premature to do that. Here's what I do know. There is no way that the Russian Federation takes Ukraine, all of Ukraine, half of Ukraine. And that was Putin's goal from the beginning, was to carve it up into at least half the country, including Kyiv. That's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. On the other side of it, the reality of it is that Ukraine is small compared to Russia in terms of size and its ability to bring scale, its ability to force conscript people. So I'm just being honest. And in the past, I have tried not to talk about this publicly because I thought it undermined the leverage that Ukraine had. But now it's the reality. Neither side is going to be able to achieve victory as defined in the most idealistic terms. So then the question becomes, if in fact there's going to be a negotiated settlement, who's going to have the leverage here? Is it going to be Putin or is it going to be Ukraine? And I want Ukraine to have the most amount of leverage possible when the time comes for those conversations to happen. They're not going to have leverage if Putin feels like he has the upper hand, that he has ways to gain and can force Ukraine into a situation where they become basically a satellite state, which is what he wants. He wants them to be like Belarus. He wants to keep territory, and then whatever's left over of Ukraine, he wants it to be a country that is forced to remain neutral and that in his orbit and sphere of influence. So I want Ukraine to have the most amount of leverage, and to do that, we have to help them. And I'm in favor of doing that, but we have to first take care of our country. So yes, I believe that we should help Ukraine, but only after we help America through our border, in the same way as Democrats are saying we won't help Israel unless you help Ukraine, and because they're holding Israel as leverage and hostage over Ukraine. So at the end of the day, that's what I hope we can achieve here, and I think it begins by the president doing what he should do anyways, which is to reverse the executive orders that have caused this migrant crisis at our border.
All right, Senator Rubio, thank you for your time. Good to see you this morning.
Thank you.
Joining us now.